welcome all of you to the Law and Licensing Committee for the Utah State Board of Education for March 2022. We are happy to be here and happy to discuss the items that are before us today. I'm not sure if it's absolutely necessary, but I want to note for the record that we do not have an anchor location, that as a committee we're meeting on Zoom, and that is apparently allowed under Utah law. So we'll just proceed with that understanding without any more detailed information. So with that, I want to make sure I'm seeing a screen that shows all of the committee members are present. Would you please just introduce yourself for those folks that are out in the cyber audience, and would so they'll know who you are, who are committee members, and start with maybe Vice Chair Booth.
Thank you, Chair Lear. My name is Randy Booth. I represent District 13 in the state of Utah. Thank you.
Thank you. And Cindy.
Cindy Davis, District 9. Good morning.
Thank you. And Natalie.
Yes, Natalie Klein. I am a board member over District 11.
And Matt Hymas.
Yep, Matt Hymas, representing District 3. Glad to be here.
And I didn't say, I'm chairing the meeting. My name is Carol Lear. I represent District 7, which is Salt Lake City and Park City. Thank you all for being here. Thank you to the staff who gives us such great support. We have an item number 1 that had a couple of members of the public who are very interested in this licensing discussion, and they will be joining us. They are, and my screen just changed, but Joylyn Lincoln is one, and Jesse Holtz, I think, or Holtz. I wasn't positive of the name, but both of you are here. And before we get started on this, we'd like to hear from both of you. Oh, there, I'm seeing the other, Holtz. I'd like to hear from both of you, and we're not going to time these because there are only 2 comments, and we don't have a really jam-packed agenda. So I'd ask you to stay to around 3 minutes, and then if committee members have questions for you or clarifications, we'll take care of that after both of you make your comments. So Jesse, would you like to go first?
Sure. Yeah, that would be fine. Can you hear me okay?
Perfect.
Great. Yeah, I spoke a little bit yesterday too at the general session, so I can reiterate that and then kind of just talk a little bit more broadly.
And Jesse, so my role. Yes, will you state your name and who you're speaking for, or if that's what you're here for? Go ahead.
Yeah. My name is Dr. Jessica Colts. I am actually an assistant professor and the director of the school counseling program at Utah State University. Okay. I have been a school counselor for the past 8 years in 3 different states. So this is my first year in Utah.
Great.
So thank you for having me.
Welcome to Utah.
Yeah, thank you. I'm generally speaking to the licensure status of school counselors in training specifically. So in our program, we have practicum and internship students out in the field, and a few of them aren't licensed at all, which brought to my attention just a concern. And I actually spoke with Malia most recently about this concern. And I was really excited to be a part of these conversations because licensure is very, very important if it's even just an associate license while they are in their training program. So that is really what I'm speaking to support the movement towards having at least an associate license during their training programs before they can be hired as a quote unquote school counselor. Some of the students in my program have been hired as a school counselor under the school counselor role without a license. And it's very concerning from that, ethical and legal point of view perspective of the program. They are still going through, they're learning. They have classes in the summer still that they're completing, and then their internship in the fall. And they're they're really being assessed on dispositions and different competencies all throughout their practicum and internship experiences. So having them as a full school counselor before they are licensed is a huge concern from the program's perspective, from our accreditation perspective, and I hope, from this licensing board's perspective too. Other things that I guess I can reiterate from yesterday too, school counselors are essential. And I saw Kathy, you have a question too. I'm happy to take that.
Thank you. Member Davis, did you want to ask?
Oh, sorry, I didn't want to interrupt. I was happy to wait till you were finished, Jesse, or Dr. Colts, but since we're stopped, I'll just go ahead and ask a little bit earlier. I thought yesterday you said that you felt like those who were working under an associate license should at least have an associate degree. And today I thought you said those who are working as a counselor should at least be working under the associate license. So I want to clarify my understanding of what specifically you are asking for from us today.
Yeah, an associate degree is a given. I didn't say anything about an associate degree yesterday. They should have a master's degree to be a full school counselor. And I know in the state of Utah, you're, and under this committee, you are allowing them to be hired as a school counselor under LEA licensure and under associate licensure. I'm really advocating for that associate licensure as the minimum, especially as they are going throughout their training program, being assessed in different dispositional areas, from the site supervisors, from the program coordinator, the instructor's point of views of, are they a good fit for the profession? And really in their practicum and internship placements are where they are being assessed and really looked at those skills for those competency areas.
So may I ask a follow-up, Chair?
Sure.
To my knowledge, I guess maybe I need a clarification. For our counselors who are hired, who are working as a counselor full-time, this is probably a question for Malia or Dr. Height, are they required? To be under an associate license, my understanding for educators is that they don't have to have even a associate degree, which I think we should revisit, because ever since I learned that a few months ago, it's been like giving me nightmares at night. But regardless, I wonder if you could just tell us quickly what is required currently for a counselor to work under an associate license, and is what Dr. Colts is asking, is it to get rid of the LEA option and only do the associate option? Is that what's being asked for? Just looking for some clarification.
And let me stop you just for a second, Cindy, and say we're maybe putting the cart before the horse, because we haven't really even introduced the rule or the proposed changes. So if we could do, I don't want to cut off that discussion, because that is the crux of the issue in this license, in this rule. And I also want to hear from Natalie Klein, who's got her hand up. So but I also kind of don't want to jump into this too much until we've just had a brief introduction to the rule. Is that okay, Cindy?
I'd be willing to just withhold all my questions if Dr. Colts is going to stay, and we can circle back to her when we're having the discussion of the rule. I can pull all these questions off for right now, if that's what you'd prefer.
That I just would like a little bit to get into the rule. Jesse, are you able to stay?
Yeah, I'm happy to stay. I think this is an important topic to be a part of.
Great. And
I'll hold then.
Thank you, Cindy. And it's kind of hard to know when to go back to the substance. Jesse, did we cut you off? Did you say everything you wanted to say for the moment?
I mean, I said my spiel yesterday, and I don't know if all of you were a part of that. I'm happy to reiterate that, but really it is going back to counselors in training, counselors in a school setting need to be licensed, just like a counselor does outside of the school setting in a community setting. So my really sum of all of that is, would you go see a community counselor that is not licensed? I wouldn't.
Okay.
Would you let your child go see one? I wouldn't. I mean, I think that's just where I'm kind of headed with all of this.
Okay, that is super helpful. Thank you for your comment. We would love you to stay, and then it sounds like we'll have additional questions, or some committee members will. Natalie, can I, do you have something very specific to this, or could you also?
I can wait.
Oh, that'd be great. So Joy Lynn, can we hear from you? And then we will introduce the rule, and then I would love to have more exchange as time permits.
My name is Joylyn Lincoln, and I am the Director of Training with the Utah Association of Public Charter Schools, and I run an Apple program partner, and we partner with 38 charter schools across the state, working on licensures for 238 teachers. I am here today to ask that we reduce the burden for elementary teachers of having to take 3 national tests to become licensed. As has been presented to the board, we are facing a critical shortage in elementary teachers, and we do not want to deter potential candidates because of the 3 tests that we're requiring. The first test that is required is the praxis, and this demonstrates content knowledge. I'm proposing that we allow teachers 3 different options to demonstrate their content knowledge. One, that we could continue to allow teachers to take the praxis. We could also look at their transcripts and see that they have sufficient coursework, i.e. in science, chemistry, or methods classes to meet that requirement, or that we utilize a tool that was introduced in the Apple Directors Meeting in November and is referred to as Katie's Rubric, which is a competency-based program to demonstrate that content knowledge. And having worked with the licensure program, I'm very confident in their ability to develop those competency rubrics that can be utilized across the state. I think by allowing all 3 options, we provide opportunity for teachers that have different strengths to demonstrate their content knowledge. I'm currently working with a teacher whose native language is Spanish and has a master's in education from Mexico, but is unable to pass the praxis exam due to the language barrier, not the content knowledge. The second test I would like to look at is the Science of Reading exam. This test assesses proficiency in depth and understanding of reading and writing development, and it is based on scientific research. It is a multiple choice test with an essay response and takes approximately 5 hours. This test is a new test requirement for the state of Utah, and I would recommend that because literacy is very crucial in our elementary teachers and they need to have a solid foundation of literacy instruction, that we allow teachers to either take the Science of Reading exam or to take the letters class and pass the letters post-test. The letters program is currently being offered across the state of Utah, and approximately 25% of my elementary Apple candidates are enrolled in this class. It's a 48 to 60 hour class designed to practice skills, and it does have a test at the end to demonstrate understanding of the information. As this test has been rolled out across many states, we've seen increased performance in student literacy, and so it is crucial that because it does have some scientific background or scientific data, that we look at that as an option to the Science of Reading exam. The third test that teachers are currently required to take is the Pedagogical Performance Assessment. I do not have any alternative options for that. I think that that is necessary, that we can demonstrate our pedagogical performance. However, I have 100 educators that are currently enrolled in taking this test, and I want you to be aware as a committee of a few obstacles that they have faced with that test. Currently, this test costs $300. If you decide before the test is started to cancel and not take the test, they will only refund you $175 of those $300. And if you decide to schedule in a different window, it costs $40. If you need to resubmit a test section, it is designed, or it is built with 4 tasks. that take approximately 3 months. And if you need to resubmit a task, that costs $75. And to actually review your score in detail cost an additional $100. And the fee that's really concerning to teachers is if they have a late submission of any of the 4 tasks, that cost $50. In the last testing window, they had 2 tasks that were due on March 2nd, and their support site was not able to handle the bandwidth of teachers uploading their information. And I had educators emailing me all night the night before saying they can't get their documents submitted because the site is down. And that would have cost them $100. We were able to work with the vendor and to extend that deadline, but I am just concerned on that bandwidth. So although I do not have an option for the pedagogical performance test, and I believe it is a crucial test for our educators, we do need to be aware of the costs associated with it that is being passed to our educators in a profession that often doesn't produce a living wage here in Utah. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for your comments. Those are 2 really helpful presenters, and we appreciate your interest. Ben, can we go back to the beginning and just, or maybe it would be Dr. Height, I'm not sure which of you, but just introduce the changes that are being proposed and the purpose for those?
Yeah, thank you, Chair Lear. Ben Rasmussen, Director of Law and Professional Practices. What you're going to be looking at this month, and also probably the next month and maybe one after that, is Dr. Hyde has been working with an advisory group to try and come up with some recommendations to bring forward on the licensing rules. And so we've got a couple of those rules coming forward this month. The first is R277-301. So Dr. Hyde, do you want to walk through the changes with them?
Yes, happy to. Malia Height, I'm the Educator Licensing Coordinator. As Ben has suggested, we've been working for about a year with the Licensing Applauds Guidance Group, which is called the LAG Group because we love ourselves an acronym. But this has gone through many rounds of feedback to a variety of stakeholders, including universities, LEAs, HR directors, superintendents, and I'm sure I'm forgetting others, charter school directors. So I'm going to walk you through the rule and the changes that have been suggested. The first one here is the elimination of the requirement as an elementary content knowledge test that has 4 distinct measures in the 4 content areas for elementary educators: math, science, reading, language arts, and social studies. And then the addition of—
Malia, can I stop you for a second just to be able to bring an understanding to this? So this would be the praxis test that one of our commenters suggested. Okay, keep going.
Correct. So this would eliminate the Praxis 5001 as a requirement for the elementary license area. As you can see in lines 117, 118, we are adding a content competency criteria, which would include the 5001 as one pathway, but we're also looking at, have they completed their general ed requirements for their bachelor's degree in mathematics and reading and writing and social studies and science. And so that would be a second pathway, very similar to what Joylyn was mentioning earlier. And then also support the idea that our candidates for the associate license would have some college potentially under their belt. So that's the first requirement, or the first amendment. The second one is we have several educators coming from out of state who hold a national SLPA, which is a speech language pathologist assistant. And so the language that is in 146, 148, and then here in 172, and then a few lines later, just allows the pathway for those individuals to qualify for a speech language technician license here in the state of Utah. It just allows that pathway. In lines 238
This allows individuals who are in the Apple program, which is our alternate route program, if they have an established learning plan by August of this year, then they wouldn't have to complete that literacy preparation test that Joylyn spoke so well about. That just keeps their plan as their plan and doesn't add any additional requirements.
And Malia, can I ask you there? You called it, I'm hearing several names for this. She called it the science of reading or the pedagogical performance test. Which one is the one in 238?
So that's the science of reading test.
Okay.
In rule, it's called the literacy preparation test, but it's the science of reading exam.
All right. Thank you. And then Joylyn spoke to the letters alternative. All right, that's great. Thank you. Go ahead, Malia.
So the next is in response to the committee's direction on modifying the LEA specific licensing. And so rather than having it be available for 1, 2, or 3 years, we are simplifying it to just be valid for 3 years. And instead of the board renewing said license, the educator is required to complete professional learning requirements just as any other licensed educator in the state as part of their renewal. The LEA still has to request that they have that license since they are the sponsor. The other thing that is
let me just clarify that. So I'm making sure I'm understanding what the process would be. So the LEA specific license is only for 3 years. And if the person wants to renew it, so it's really not only for 3 years, it's for 3 years. And then if the person wants to continue, that person would need to complete the required professional development that a traditional teacher would. Is that right?
correct. And the LEA, the hiring employing LEA, would need to request that they maintain that license.
Okay. All right. Thanks. Go ahead.
In line 341, we have an addition that the LEA specific endorsement may not be awarded driver education, and that is to align with state code around driver education instruction. And then finally, in this last section here, any individual who is in Cactus or USIMS with an assignment as an educator must be enrolled in FBI RAPBAC with a cleared background check. It also provides the direction that if somebody can't enroll in RAPBAC because their fingerprints are poor, which is a physiological limitation that is highly present in educators, which is fun and weird fact, then they would need to submit those fingerprints every 2 years so that we can see if they can become enrolled in RAPBAC, and also to maintain that continuous monitoring as required in state code.
Great. Before we jump back into questions, and I see now that Matt also has questions, I want to go back to Cindy, and then I want to go back to Natalie, and then Matt.
Well, I just had a quick clarification. I think we skipped lines 271. Can we just double check that? I may have missed it.
That's part of the speech language technician
Okay.
pathway that
Yeah.
she mentioned. I didn't stop specifically there, but Malia did talk about those.
Right.
Okay.
Is that okay,
Thank you.
Matt?
Thanks.
So with all of that background in mind, let's go now to the comments. And Joylyn, I didn't say to you, I would hope you also, and I see you're still here, I would hope you could stay through this discussion as well, because others could have questions for you also. It seems like the two of you have sort of different issues, the two presenters or the two speakers. So we appreciate your information. With that, let's go back. Cindy, are you able to pick up where you left off with questions that you were asking?
Yeah, I still have the same question. for on the counseling issue, and then I have a question for Joylyn Lincoln, but I can ask that after if others have questions in between. My question still remains for our first presenter. What are you asking for? Are you asking us to get rid of the LEA specific license option for counselors? And are you saying that you're okay with the associate license? Because quite frankly, the associate license, I don't even think, does it even require a degree for a counselor to be working? So I'm seeing nodding heads. So maybe we can get some clarification there.
That's
If I
great.
may, Chair.
Let me go first to Malia and then to Jesse to respond.
Sure. So currently, to qualify for an associate educator license in school counseling, the candidate must be enrolled in a master's degree program that would yield a school counselor license.
Okay, I missed that. Thank you.
Yeah. So that's the requirement for the associate license. And I know in speaking with Dr. Colt previously this week, that the desire is to add the limitation of an LEA specific license for school counselors.
Okay, but when we're saying the person has to then have a degree and be in a master's program, so that does say has a college degree. Jesse,
Yeah.
did you have anything to add to that?
I follow up,
Oh yeah, yes, go ahead, Cindy.
but you're saying that is not the requirement for an LEA specific?
Correct. So for the LEA specific, the requirement is that the LEA requests it and that the individual has passed a background check and completed minimal training in the very basics of educator ethics, teaching standards, and special ed law.
So it's nearly no different than a teacher. It's the same as a teacher.
Correct. It's the same requirement as every other LEA specific license.
One
Cindy?
more quick follow-up, Chair Lear.
Yes, please.
Has your advisory group really sort of, did they dive into the counseling area of this and have they studied this out? And do they, because I don't see any recommendation changes from the group.
So this was not an area that the LAG discussed in particular. This has been an area of concern that school counseling programs throughout the state have been communicating their concerns with this, and as we've switched to the new licensing structure for the last 2 years, there have been some pretty tragic circumstances that have occurred because there have been underqualified school counselors working in Utah schools. And so if it's not addressed today, it certainly is on the next agenda for our guidance group to discuss.
And we are bringing this back, did I hear, in the April committee meeting again for additional potential changes?
Not this rule. This rule is not slated to be adjusted. It's the other licensing rules that we're planning to adjust.
Is the counseling in this rule or the other rule?
This rule. So it would need to be added to this section here that Ben has, which are the limitations of where the LEA specific licenses are not allowed.
Okay. Cindy, did you have more on that?
I know, just let's all think about this for a minute and decide if we need to go any certain direction here or request staff to dive in or make an amendment or what.
And I want to go to Natalie, who is next in the queue, but I also want another sort of clarification of this, and maybe not clarification, but added information. And I'm going to look to Malia or maybe Angie. Do you know what, and maybe Joy Lynn could, well, I don't want to rope too many people into this, but what would be the LEA response if we were to rethink that proposal, which I very much support, just by the by, but would the LEAs be very troubled because then they couldn't have anybody at all? Or how much would that affect our current situation? And Randy, now I see your hand. So Malia, could you just respond to that, or Angie, whoever has insight?
I defer to Malia.
So we could certainly look and see how many LEA specific licenses have are in counseling, and I'm going to have our data person look that up right this very minute. But essentially what it would do is that it would not allow an LEA to receive funding of around $8,000 per educator that does not have a license but has an assignment.
Okay, but the numbers we need more clarification on. Cindy, did that cover your concerns for the time being? I think you're muted.
I'm gonna make a motion to do something, not a motion, but maybe a direction, but I just am trying to think through it for right now while we continue talking about this.
That'd be helpful. Thank you. Natalie, you are next.
I don't think I have a question at this point.
Okay, thank you. And Matt had his question answered. Randy.
So this has been a very important discussion. I'm very happy that we had this opportunity to get some clarification. I'm concerned that whether it's this particular policy or whether it's another rule that we're going to be discussing later in our next month's meeting, I really have very strong feelings that we must have anyone that is functioning as a school counselor, they've got to have at least the minimum that is being suggested by our guest. I just can't, for kids' safety, we just can't trifle with this. So I really hope that we can come to a common understanding as to how we're dealing with this issue to make sure that we're protecting students.
We are thank you, Member Booth. We are in a kind of a catch-22 because on the one hand, we want to help LEAs have adequate counselors. And on the other hand, is having a live, warm body who purports to be a counselor better or worse than having someone who has adequate training? And I'm not enough of an expert in this field to know the answer to that. Matt.
Yeah, I'm right there with those concerns, Carol. I think about what we've been doing for the counselors. I think it's the teacher to counselor pipeline, the shortage that we've had with counselors. As somebody who works in a school, I know the importance of good certified counselors. I really do. I'm worried that if we, and maybe we're not, maybe I'm reading this wrong, but I'm worried if we put more on them, we're going to have less of them. And it's just a concern of mine. So Malia, I guess the question, can I ask a question to Dr. Haidt? Is that okay, Chair?
Please, yes, please.
How well is the system that we have now working for our LEAs? Are they happy with it? Are they not happy with it? Yeah, if you could just speak to how well overall the system is working that we have.
Yeah, I think that for teachers, the system is working well. I think that as as you do any kind of major systemic change, there's going to be some bumps and refinements that you have to make that you just don't anticipate when you're overhauling everything. And I think this is one of those rocks that just never got turned over and perhaps should have. I think that the LEAs ultimately want flexibility in having additional pathways to getting licensed people into their LEAs. And I think that our system does that. I think that there have been this year some challenges within the realm of special education that we're addressing, and will still have the same kind of flexibility that has been present in this last year, even not allowing LEA specific licenses in these license areas. So I think we're on the right path. I think we're still in the middle part of the journey. We're in Act 2.
Yeah.
So we'll have some of these things more and better refined.
Follow up, Chair, just briefly. I'll take that as a yes. Are the issues that are being had, I mean, there's concerns for kids. Are they due to the licensure process, or are they just issues that we're going to have with working with people? Do you understand what I'm saying?
I do. I think some of the challenges of licensing that are hard to understand is that we try and make rules and try and make it as very clear and black and white as possible. But as many people as there's that many different pathways. And I constantly am trying to find ways to put square pegs into round holes. And so my goal is to help make those holes as flexible as possible to fit every kind of peg. And I think going to the competency pathway is helping that, but because it's such a shift in philosophy, that's, I think, what is lending itself to making it feel hard. But once we all get on board and are like, oh, this is just the new way we do things, and we can understand and appreciate that it really is way more flexible and has way fewer barriers, then I think we'll see all of the fruits of these labors and these struggles.
Thank you, Dr. Hyde. Perfect.
Carol, you're muted.
Thank you. I have to note that the irony of the prohibition being driver's ed, but school counseling is just fine. And when you say round pegs into square holes or vice versa, Malia, I also am struck just by my experience of looking at this for a couple of decades is sometimes you just stop trying to fit that peg into that hole and say we need to rethink the construct and what we're doing. So I have to add that, and I am interested in maybe this discussion, and maybe a motion is premature, maybe not, because I'm interested in what those horror stories are. If there are real if there are situations that have put students at risk and they relate to the training of a counselor, that gives me pause as we try to make changes. That's my comment. Natalie, and then back to Cindy.
Okay, well, with all this talk about the licensing of these individuals, can you talk to us a little bit more about what that licensing entails? What is their training? Dr. Colts talked about, many times referring to dispositions and competencies that they're being trained in. What specific dispositions or competencies are they being trained in order to qualify them for this work?
Thank you, Dr. Colts. Sorry, I'm
Yeah, of course, no worries. So some of the dispositions relate to conscientiousness, coping, and self-care of themselves to best support those that they're working with, openness, cooperativeness, moral reasoning, interpersonal skills, cultural sensitivity, self-awareness, emotional stability. And then the most important is ethical behavior. So these are, really assessed from when they enter into the program during admissions. And then the next big assessment is during that practicum and internship stage when they are, relating and working with individuals. So K through 12 students, parents, other staff members, and that's where the site supervisors have a huge say in how are they doing in these dispositional areas. And then also, our program specifically is pretty big. We have about 50 or 60 students in each course that we have. So that is almost impossible for the instructors to really dive in and assess that. So that's why these supervisors, whether it's primary on site or secondary from the university or community setting, really look at how are these students dealing with these situations, whether it's with their own staff members, students in all of these different areas.
Follow up?
Yes, please.
So you talked about these dispositions. How do those compare to the competencies, or competencies versus skills?
So the dispositions of school counselors, those are really, how they are looking at these different lenses, these different issues during their counseling day. They are different characteristics that we see as a goodness of fit in the counseling world. It goes back to how they're modeling, how they are responding. Are they being appropriate during, coursework responses and, with interactions with instructors or their community. So, it's looking at all of those things, I guess, in sum too, with dispositions and competencies together.
So, I guess I didn't hear about the skills, like their actual ability to counsel with these students. It's more about their personal mindsets. What about this? I think the skills are probably the most critical in this, and I haven't heard anything about that.
They are, and that's where, they learn skills, it should be in, before practicum, during their practicum times when they're interacting with others, how are they able to listen? How are they able to respond and ask open-ended questions? Those do go along in that counseling realm, but those aren't necessarily the skills that school counselors always bring to the table in that therapy quote unquote mindset. That's more of the community counselor. In school counseling, they do short-term counseling and refer out to the community. So that's why that base understanding of those counseling skills is essential, and they are being looked at through the different programs, throughout the country, throughout our state of Utah. And those are, essential of, are the students able to meet these skills and look at and show these skills appropriately, or are they not a good fit? So that's where that those layers of we're assessing them throughout the program continue to happen.
No,
Can I just one more follow up?
finally, yes.
I would love to see a chart of sorts put together with those three different columns, listing out the competencies versus the skills versus the dispositions, so that we can tell the difference and we can see specifically what those things are, and weigh them on their merit, because there's, like it was mentioned earlier, there's a lot of damage that can be done by an untrained, unskilled counselor. They can do a lot more damage than good if it's not done right. And I personally would like to know exactly what it is we are looking for in those counselors, and what exactly they're being taught, how they're being trained in those three areas, specifically detailed out, so that we can see how they're being trained, what they're being trained in, what specific skills.
Natalie, I wrote down skills, dispositions. What was the third thing?
Competencies.
Competencies. And
Chair
have-
Lear, if I may.
yes,
Our rule,
oh,
our
go ahead.
yeah, sorry. R277-306 outlines the school counselor education program requirements. They are required to align to the 2016 KCREP standards, which are the National School Counselor Training Program standards. And those standards outline very specifically the competencies, dispositions, and skills that are required in a school counseling program. You can see it there in subsection 1C. It's the 2016 Council for Accreditation of Counseling and Related Educational Program Standards.
Thank you. Excellent information. And Jesse, are those the same competency, skills, and dispositions that your program follows? Yes.
Yes, and it should be across the state in the other programs too. I know that Malia said that that's the movement. So, and which is great because that's where all programs should be going.
Right. And I just had one more follow-up to Natalie's, and it's a logistical question. When, and maybe for Dr. Colts, when the supervisors of these counseling students are supervised or visited or observed, it's not quite like teaching. Do the supervisors actually observe counseling sessions?
Yeah, and
go ahead.
And that's where our program is revamping right now, just looking at what's been done and what are the standards that are maybe missed a little bit, and those counseling skills. That is one area where I am having a few goals with our program instructors and our supervisors to really hit on a little more coming out of the program, and ensuring that the counselors in training are prepared to work in a counseling type of one-on-one or small group setting effectively using those counseling skills. So
thank you. Natalie, were you finished? Your hand's still up. Thanks. You're either muted or finished. I can't tell. And thank you. Cindy.
Thank you, Chair. Having listened to all of our fellow committee members, I don't think we're ready to necessarily amend this to have a full removal of the LEA license, but I do think we've heard some serious concerns expressed here, and I think it would warrant, and this doesn't take an official motion, but I do think it would warrant asking our staff to revisit this over the next month and do a deep dive into some of the unintended consequences of the rule for students, and some of the unintended consequences perhaps for the LEAs and students if we amend the rule. And so we can get a holistic look at what's being requested and the merits of that, and how we may want to move forward a month from now. And I also have a procedural question, and this might be for Angie or Deputy Superintendent Stallings. If we ask to have this looked at and revisited, can we still, after our teacher discussion and we circle back to Joylyn Lincoln, can we still pass this rule out today and pass it on to full board if we want to revisit this piece next month?
Yes, you can. Angie Stallings, Deputy Superintendent of Policy. Generally, we don't do it 1 month to the next month. I mean, if it's just a month difference, you may wait. But if you think that the discussion, let's say we bring it back again next month, if we think it's going to take more than potentially 1 month of discussion in law and licensing, I would recommend going ahead, moving this forward. We can file it. And actually legally, we can file another version even the next month. I think they don't generally like us to do that, but it's possible. And the reason why I say you might want to just go ahead and have whatever you're comfortable with today move forward is that there is a possibility that when you bring this issue back next month, I could see you saying, well, let's actually take a couple months on it, where you may not actually take action in April and then you finally take action in May. So that would be probably my recommendation, unless we're absolutely sure you think we'd be ready to take action next month, then we could potentially hold this.
So
I'd also add that we are hoping, I think, that the changes that we're currently proposing be in place for the next school year. And if we delay this much longer, we're threatening that possibility.
right now, that concerned me too. I had another thought as we look more carefully at the issues that Cindy raised and that have been expressed by other committee members. I would also like to look at those very similar kinds of positions, like what applies for school psychologists. Are there other?
Chair,
Yes.
I don't know if you noticed what's on the screen, but we do have a number of license areas already that can't receive the LEA specific. And actually most of the related fields like school psychologist, social worker, audiologist, none of those can get an LEA specific at this point.
That is really thank you very much. I should have been a little quicker on the uptake, but I appreciate that. And have we included then, is that a comprehensive list? At least in terms of those that are related to school counseling. So we don't keep coming back to we don't encounter the same problem again. I see 3 hands. Let's go to Malia and then Cindy and Matt.
Yes, I just wanted to note that we got our data back from our amazing data steward. And there are currently in the state of Utah 1,430 counselors. 30 of them are on an LEA specific license. 16 are operating with no license, 74 have an associate, and the balance, 1,310, have the professional license.
Oh, yes.
And I did put that in the chat.
Thank you. Cindy, I think I said, and Matt, or was it vice versa?
You said some are not in an LEA specific or an associate or a professional. That's not even possible.
So the way that
do we allow that somewhere?
Yes. So employment, LEAs may employ someone, and if they do not have a license, what that means is that they do not generate funding to help pay for that license. However, they are not in compliance with state law, which states that all educators operating in the state of Utah must have an educator license.
So is there any consequence for that aside from the loss of funding? No.
There's not any beyond loss of funding.
Okay.
Can I follow up, Chair?
Sure.
So I kind of thought I heard you say, Dr. Hite, that somehow counselors actually would have been included in this list and somehow it just got missed. Did I hear that, or was there a rationale for purposefully not including counselors in this list?
This list was created because these license areas were not allowable by federal IDEA law. School counselors not included in federal IDEA special education law as a special educator. And so that is why they were not added to this list.
Thank you. Matt, continue. Were you finished for a minute? And because I want to come back to the teaching issue in the rule as well. And thank you, Joylyn, for your patience. Cindy, are you all right for a minute?
Well, I guess then I would like to request that we send this back for a deeper dive look. Well, actually, I don't know. There aren't that many. I mean, I'm tempted right now, depending on some feedback that I get from my colleagues, to add the counseling license to this list, but to grandfather in those that are currently on LEA specific licenses. What's the possibility of doing that? And what do my committee members think about that? I'm not going to make the motion unless it's going to pass.
Well, and I also wondered if somebody there, Angie or Ben, could draft an amendment that would look like that for our consideration. And I've got multiple hands that may or may not complement that motion, but Cindy, let's.
Because really, this was the information I wanted to know for next month. Was what's the real impact going to be if we did this?
Well, and
So might as well not wait and just get it over with now.
And my reservation is those are the raw numbers, but would it just be, I'd like to know where those non-licensed counselors are and where those that are under credentialed, or I'd like to know where they are. If they're in the heart of Granite, I'm not so sympathetic. If they're in Moab or Kane County, then I maybe, just speaking as one board member, let me get to these other hands though.
Chair, can I ask a really quick follow-up though before
Yes.
you go?
Go ahead.
On the 16 that have no license, I heard you say, Dr. Height, that they don't receive funding to be able to get licensed. Is that the case, or do they not receive funding? Does the LEA not receive funding for that person to do the job and they're pulling the funding from somewhere else?
Malia.
Yeah, it's the latter, that they would, they don't receive the funding for the teaching or for the educator position. So it's around $8,000 that the LEA generates by having a licensed individual as an educator. And so that's what wouldn't be sent to the LEA if they are.
Okay, so honestly, that category doesn't matter where they are because they can keep doing that even if we take away the LEA specific option for this licensure, and they're willing to take that $8,000 penalty. So the only ones we need to know where they are or what's happening with, Chair Lear, correct me if I'm wrong, are really the LEA specific licenses and why those are necessary.
And how strongly the LEA feels about it. Speaking loosely. Let me get the other comments and then let's move on. We've done this for an hour. Randy, we haven't heard. Oh, Jennifer. Jennifer, do you have something quick?
Yes, just real quick. And it really is reaffirming Angie's idea because that was also my idea. If you amend it now, you can always not accept it and change your minds at next full board meeting. So there's no harm in putting it in, given the impact. And then we can do some of that. Let's canvass the field and see how disruptive this would be. But then we can move this forward. This does help get rid of the praxis. And that is something that our communities are looking forward to. So would love to see this go forward and put this amendment in. And then if you guys get a bunch of feedback, you can always be pulled in April, but that allows us to keep moving.
Thanks, Jennifer. Randy.
Today, I've just been amazed at Dr. Height and her staff and the careful, thorough, they are working so hard for maximum flexibility for our educators and our LEAs, and yet are still so on top of what's happening federally, statewide. I just feel, I don't feel worried after having had this discussion today that we're not there yet, but we're going to get there. We're just taking care of it one step at a time. So I feel very comfortable moving ahead today and passing it on to the full board with whatever amendments or whatever we feel like we need to do, because it's not going to just, okay, it's solved. We won't worry about that for 10 years. It's an ongoing process. And I feel very, very confident in the excellent people who are very carefully monitoring and massaging this whole thing that needs to be happening in this area. Thank you very much.
Thank you. You're great at showing appreciation and expressing confidence, Randy. Thank you. Matt, you took your hand down on purpose.
Sorry, I was going to make a joke at you, Carol, but I decided not to.
I won't be at all offended.
No, it's okay. My concerns were similar with that of Member Davis's. I did wonder the 16 that have no license, is there a time frame? But it's already answered. It doesn't matter. I'm sorry. I just
No,
wasted
it's
1
all right.
minute of your time. You can't get it back.
I thank you, and I always appreciate a joke on. You prepare me for my children. Angie or Jennifer, and then Angie, and then Malia, and then let's move on as quick as possible. Jennifer,
I just need to take my hand down. So sorry about that.
Oh, Angie.
So good news is my hand is up primarily to ask if Malia can speak to the language about beginning in the 22-23 school year.
Thank you, Malia.
Yes, so if the timing on this would not allow an LEA specific license to be added, the rule would go into effect in June, which effectively already puts the implementation at the beginning of next school year. Additionally, as far as thinking about the school counselors who are already working on the LEA specific license, an educator license is a property right. And so we can't take them away because we're not giving new ones. And so they would maintain an LEA specific license, and then that would give them the time in order to enroll in a program and qualify for the associate educator license.
So,
And
so I'm sorry to interrupt, but what are you saying? Do we need to say 23-24 school year? Do we need to say those who are in the program now? Something along those lines.
I don't think that a grandfather clause is required at all. I think we could add school counselor. It's there. I did get the list of those who are the 16, and more than half are working in large or larger school districts. One is three are at charter schools, and then there's very small school districts that have 111.
Okay, thank you. Cindy.
My bigger concern was the 30 who are on LEA specific licenses. Are these in rural schools? Are resources slim? Do these folks not have the funds to go get a master's degree? And that's my bigger concern. So I'm wondering, can we create an can we amend this to remove the LEA specific license for the future, but grandfather these 30 people? You're saying you don't think that's needed, but by saying that, what you're saying is those 30 people in a year are going to have to enroll in a master's degree program.
Malia?
Yeah, so if somebody was granted the LEA specific license this year for 3 years as a school counselor, then that would give them 2 additional years to serve or to enroll in a program and qualify for the associate license. We're working on the list of the AEL, the associate licenses, and where they are, or not AEL, the LEA specific. But those licenses would stay in place. And as long as their license is valid and hasn't expired, then they would still be considered a licensed school counselor.
Okay, so they would at least have a couple more years, and then they could think through if they want to do an online program or something.
Correct.
I personally would still like a little more information, maybe for the board meeting, maybe another month. I don't know. I'd like to see a little more information from LEAs about how disruptive or helpful this would be. And also maybe if there are any data about, I don't know, this seems a reach, but effectiveness or concerns or I don't know, feels anecdotal. I don't know. I feel like I still need information. Cindy, were you finished?
No, I was going to make a motion. Would you be comfortable with us amending this to remove the LEA specific license for counselors with a request that that information be brought to the full board so we can move the whole thing forward and not have to send it twice to administrative rules, which they don't love.
I guess that's an Angie question.
No, it's a committee member's question.
Oh,
Your question.
let's hear from let me hear from Matt.
I'm kind of on the same lines as you, Carol. I'm not ready for that yet. If we want to move this through as is and then talk to the full board about making that, removing the LEA specific, I think it's a little early for
You
me.
can do
as
it that
well.
way too. Yeah.
Yeah. That's my thought on that.
I'm a little, and I'm conflicted because I'm 2/3 persuaded that we need to put in some more, I hate the words guardrails, but I'm persuaded that way. But I want more information about how disruptive this would be to LEAs, and I am concerned that whatever we do today sort of sets the baseline. And it's a lot easier to leave that than it is to not change it. And then it is to change it. So I don't know where I'm not sure where I want the baseline. Angie, can you contribute to the discussion?
So I was just going to add that there's two things we have going in our favor. If you want to keep it in just so that it gets out there and starts really, it's going to get the conversation going quickly. We have two things that are going in our favor. Number one, Malia and I are both going to be at the HR Directors Conference in, I want to say it's in like 2 weeks, Malia. And we could get feedback. And I think Malia would probably be the best person to get that feedback, but I could also ask it from that group in 2 weeks. Number two, it would be a very easy amendment. It would just be striking that, line once it goes to the board. But if you wanted to move forward, I say there's actually a good opportunity for some robust feedback in the next month. But, the other option is as staff, we're always happy to bring it back next month and just really focus on this discussion, which could give you an opportunity to have school counselors other than Ms. Colts, who's here today. We actually have our school counselors are in a conference today as we speak. So we don't have many of our working school counselors in the meeting today. And that might be an opportunity for them to join us next month. So I think those are the pros and cons, or the pros of each approach.
Thank you very much. That helps. Cindy, do you have an amendment you'd like to propose or not?
Well, I like what Board Member Hyman suggested. And once we get through the teacher portion discussion, we can move this forward with whatever changes we need to make in those areas, if any. And then we can ask staff to get that additional information that you're interested in, Chair Lear, and the rest of us are as well. And then we can decide in full board meeting to make that amendment in full board meeting. But as for now, we keep it as it is, this
So
section.
you'd like to strike the line 341 that is now underlined on our screen.
In line 3.1 is about driver's ed.
It looks
Oh,
like
I'm sorry. You're right.
language was pulled. Yeah.
I took the language down. Sorry.
Thank you. Sorry. Sorry.
Yeah, Chair Lear, I think we make the amendment in full board if we get all the information.
Okay.
Dr. Hyde is going to seek at the HR conference and with our LEAs.
Great. Let's move on to the discussion of the teacher concerns that Ms. Lincoln brought to us. I'm not sure who to start with. Does anybody want to ask further questions of Ms. Lincoln? Does anybody have an amendment to propose? Thank you, Sydney. You saved me. Thank you.
This is more of a technical question. I was writing really frantically and I wanted to get all the costs down. And what was the cost for the resubmittal for the PPAT?
$75.
$75. Okay, thank you. And then a question for her. Have you read through the rule? And do you feel that these changes that are suggested today would be helpful for you? And is there anything additional that you were asking for that was not included in this rule. I think the one thing I heard you asking for that I think is not necessarily written in this rule is that letters assessment be considered as an alternative to the literacy test. Is that the only thing that you suggested that's not covered already in this rule?
Yes, that was the one thing. I'm very excited that the praxis could be one of the pathways on the in the content knowledge demonstration. But looking at the science of reading test, State Code 53E-6-301 says that there will be a literacy preparation assessment, and where the letters program has an assessment at the end and is based on the science of reading and a very extensive course, that maybe that could be a second pathway to meet that state requirement from code and be included in this rule.
Follow-up, Chair.
Yes, please.
Might we hear from staff about the differences? I'm interested in someone who's really carefully reviewed the content of the letters summative assessment and the science of reading assessment. Are there similarities? Do they cross over? Could this be something that could be considered as a competency measure?
Dr. Swanson has her hand up.
Thank you. In the new statute SB 127, we are actually required to have a competency pathway for that assessment. So staff will be working on options for teachers to take besides the foundations of reading assessment with that legislative code change. So we'll be back to you with options. We've considered letters, but have not done enough investigation to see if it aligns with our competencies as closely as it would need to kind of be the competency path, but it's very likely. There are some issues in terms of that test is not monitored. It is, done with your own resources and access. And so that, unlike something like the PPAT or other assessments, there's not monitoring of that assessment when it's taken. And so who's actually taking it, those kinds of things come into play. So there'd be some things we need to work through, but we do have to come up with a competency pathway. So that will be forthcoming to the board in the next few months.
Thank you. Helpful. Cindy, and I'm still not sure from Joy Lynn's perspective if we need an amendment to this to address her concerns, or if it's or if we're still more in a holding pattern. Joy Lynn, can you speak to that?
So my concerns are mostly addressed in this rule very satisfactorily, with the exception of the science of reading. But if that's forthcoming, then I have no problems with the rule as
that's
it is.
So helpful. Thank you. So it looks like what we've done then supports what we're hearing from Joy Lynn, who works with a number of charter schools. Cindy. You're muted.
I have a motion.
Please.
You're muted, Cindy.
You're muted. I'm sorry.
I clicked it. I move that the committee approve R277-301 draft 1 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading.
Okay. Thank you for that motion. The motion is that the committee approve R277-301 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading.
I'd like to speak briefly to the motion.
Yes, please.
Mostly really what I want to do is echo some of what board member Booth said earlier and Dr. Height. And I really appreciate Dr. Height saying that when you do a major overhaul like this, it's going to take some time revisiting and coming back. And we may be revisiting this again or making additional amendments. I know we have another board member on our larger team who has some feedback, but just couldn't get it done for this meeting that we may need to consider in the larger meeting. And I suspect we may bring this back more than once every 5 years, like we do our other rules, as we're trying to work out the kinks and get feedback from the field and from individuals and students and parents and practitioners. So I just want to say thank you for the flexibility. Thank you for the patience when we do bring forward, what about these people? Can they be grandfathered? What about this? What about that? And just the gathering together an advisory group and thoughtfully considering the feedback that we are getting from those that are impacted by these rules. So thank you for that.
Thank you. I also appreciate the creativity, and I also am still gravely concerned about the balance between that Dr. Colts brought to our attention, between the adequate preparation and the skill set. And I still want to note, I think looking at those three things that Natalie brought to light for me will be helpful. And I'm worried about, concerned and interested in the balance between the skill set and the need for counselors. And sometimes a bad counselor is worse than no counselor at all, or an unprepared counselor. So I want to still keep that in the front of our brains. With that, thank you for your comments. Thank you for your, thank you to our two presenters and experts in bringing this information to us. With the committee members, please vote on that motion. I see 4 yay votes and 1 nay vote, which would be Member Klein. Thank you. We are moving on to our item 3.2 on the agenda. We hope that everything else will not be quite as exhaustive as this. Ben.
Yes, thank you, Chair. If I may. So R277312 is another one of the rules that has been reviewed with lag and that we are bringing some changes to you today. There are 3 main areas that I'll go through, and then Malia can answer questions if you have them. The first thing that we're doing in this rule is we're kind of updating the terminology. When we originally drafted this replacement rule, we used the name of a smaller subset of USIMs when we were referring to educate. So we want to make it clear that we want to use the terminology USIMs in this rule. And so you'll see that that has been defined and that the terminology has been updated throughout the rule. The second change we've made or are recommending is on lines 78 through 83. This is an attempt to make sure that when educators leave an LEA, that the USIMs is updated expeditiously. And so we've added a recommended language that would require LEAs to update Cactus or USIMs within 2 weeks when an educator leaves their LEA, and puts consequences that can be imposed if they don't follow up and don't complete required training in that regard. The third change is on the list of things that are included in the educator lookup tool. We just wanted to add the voluntary surrender when an educator just gives up their license rather than going through the UPAC process. When their license is looked up on that tool, it would just show that they surrendered their license with this change. So those are the changes that are being recommended.
Thank you. I'm not seeing any questions from, I'm not seeing, I hope that wasn't me. I'm not seeing any questions from committee members. It sounds like this is more of a clarification. I had one more clarifying question. Because USIM seems to be a more ubiquitous term that's used in several rules. Would this also be added to that rule that includes those definitions, or does that have to come separately?
I think that's probably something we should add there at some point. Yeah.
Idea.
Okay. I don't see any hands. Anybody would like to make a motion? I'll make a motion that the committee approve R277-312 draft 1 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading. Any further discussion of that motion? I don't see any. Committee members, please vote. I see 5 votes in the affirmative. So that rule passes unanimously. and will be forwarded to the board. Next item, Ben.
Yeah, the next item we have for you is R277-433. This is the rule that is on disposal of textbooks in the public schools. This is up for its 5-year review. So we went through this with Alan Griffin, who's over the Instructional Materials Commission. We have made a few recommended changes, updating the definition of textbook to be consistent with code, and also taking out some provisions that, like the term usable textbooks wasn't used in the rules, so we took out that definition. Also took out some kind of obsolete language under the textbook definition, and that's what is being recommended here, along with the continuation of the rule.
Thank you. Any committee members who have questions about this or any comments about it? Member Davis.
I move that we ask staff, I think Deputy Superintendent Stallings helped me with some wording. I move that the committee recommends that the board request staff to work with the legislature to repeal section 53G-7-606, which requires LEAs to notify other LEAs in the state of the LEA's intent to dispose of the LEA's textbooks before disposing of the textbooks. I'd like to speak to the motion.
I thank you so much. You read my mind. Member Davis, speak to the motion, please.
That is kind of a long motion. I'm wondering if we can shorten it at all a tad before we get to the full board, if it passes today. But I think this rule is not needed anymore. Most of our LEAs have moved to electronic texts, and those that are still using texts, I mean, it's in their best interest to sell their texts to other LEAs if they want to, and to put a notice out and recoup the money. And then if those LEAs don't want them because they're so outdated or so old and they could benefit someone humanitarian wise or something of that nature, they can do that. All of our LEAs already have policies in place. Deputy Superintendent Stallings, I asked her, like, why do we even have this still? And she said she actually asked the group of superintendents about this and said, do you, is this a burden? Is it not a burden? And they said, well, we already have all those policies in place, so we don't really think about it. It's just our practice of what we do. So I just think it's an opportunity to take one law off the books, one more law that we don't need to have. We have so many laws. And it's been updated to be a little more brief. Thank you. I'll restate the motion. That the committee recommends that the board request staff to work with legislature to repeal section 53G-7-606. Thank you.
Thank you for that motion. Member Klein.
I was just, sorry, I was just wondering, is this something that could be made available to parents? Like if they're getting rid of books, is there, I mean, it doesn't have to do with the motion, obviously, but just my concern about just throwing away good books that, you know, just because they're old doesn't mean they're bad or outdated, depending on the individual, you know, what they're looking for. So is it something, I mean, I know at USBE, they make books available that they're getting rid of, you know, they have that table where they can, you know, people can just come and help themselves. Is there something we could set up for schools to do that and make their old books available to the public?
Thank you for that question. Angie, would you like to respond to that?
I was wondering if Alan might have some information about what LEAs currently do and if they currently make those available to families.
Thank you, yes, thanks, Alan, for being so patient and being available. Alan, you want to speak to that question or anything related to that?
You're muted, Alan.
There we go. Alan Griffin, Curriculum Content Specialist at the board. We have a procedure by which people who are, or districts who are trying to get rid of textbooks will call into our office and or send an email in, and all that happens is that email is reproduced and sent out to other districts. And at that point in time, it's it's completely up to them. We don't have any enforcement procedure that I'm aware of to check and see who gets what. I don't see any particular need for legislation on this. I think Board Member Davis is right on top of it. I think it's a good voluntary procedure that districts can dispose of those kinds of things. But I think the bottom line for me is I don't see any need for it to be a law. I think it's just completely up to the districts to do that. We dispense textbooks that we've reviewed in what we call a giveaway day to the public, and they come in and take our textbooks that we have reviewed. But that's become less and less because now everything is going electronic, and our reviews are electronic, and so we handle very few textbooks at this point.
Thanks, Alan, for that update. Cindy or Natalie, does that address what you were asking to some extent? Natalie?
I'm good, thank you.
Okay, thank you. I wanted to add to this motion before we vote, and I don't know if your hand's up. Would you like to speak again, Cindy? Is that right? Or are you just waiting?
No, I was just gonna say, I certainly hope if other LEAs aren't going to use the books that, you know, our LEAs are saying to parents, take them if you want them, or giving them to a humanitarian opportunity.
I agree.
Or individual policies.
Right, I agree. And I also agree with the sentiments from a couple of people that this is maybe one law we don't need, one rule we don't need. I wanted to add that charter schools have been exempt from this for 5, 7, 10 years. And I think this is one of the great values of charter schools where we can experience a difference and then say, you know what, districts don't need this either. Traditional schools don't need this either, and look to the example that's exempted 4 or 5 times the number of LEAs that charter schools include versus 41 school districts. So I think this is a valuable lesson. Thank you. The motion is already before the committee that the committee will, no, let's go to first, this is Member Davis's motion. The committee recommends that the board request staff to work with the legislature to repeal section 53G-7-606. And would the members vote please on that motion? And I am seeing 5 yes votes, making it unanimous. So Angie, I was just going to tell you to keep it in the front of your brain, but now we have a motion, and now a motion on the rule because it's still required. I'll make that motion that the committee continue and approve R277-433 draft 1 on first reading as amended and forward to the board for continuation and approval on second and final reading.
Draft 1 hasn't been amended, just to clarify.
So I should say
Just draft 1.
Draft 1, but that's right. There was not an amendment to the rule. It was more an amendment to propose to staff. Let me try that again. The motion is that the committee continue and approve R277-433 draft 1 on first reading, forward to the board for continuation and approval on second and final reading. Would committee members please vote? And I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 affirmative votes. That motion passes unanimously. The next item, Ben?
Yes, the next item is R277-110. This is another rule that's up for its 5-year review. I reviewed this with the finance staff, and they didn't have any changes to make. They said that it was everything was working smoothly. There was a draft 1 added with a couple of minor amendments late, and I apologize for that, but we did notice a few things that we needed to update. One of the things was the USIMS issue that we talked about in R277-312. We wanted to update that in this rule, and there was also an old reference that you'll see there on lines 24 and 25 to the old code before it was recodified. So we wanted to update that. But essentially, we're just asking the committee to carry on with the status quo on this rule substantively.
Thank you. Very helpful. Any questions from committee members? I'll accept a motion. Member Booth.
I recommend that the committee approve R277-110 draft 1 on first reading and forward to the board for amendment and continuation on second and final reading.
Thank you, Member Booth. The motion is that the committee continue R277-110 draft 1 on first reading and forward to the board for continuation on second and final reading. Any further discussion to that motion? I see none. Would committee members please vote? I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 yay votes, which makes that a unanimous response to the motion. So thank you for that vote. And our last action item R277-520, which is a repeal. Would you like to explain that, Ben?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So this rule has gradually been replaced by other rules as we've been updating the licensing process. Most of the language or the provisions that were covered by this rule are now addressed in R277-309. And then the final thing that was still outstanding, we've added to R277-301 today about the background checks. So when we talked about that language. So this rule is now obsolete completely, and we just are asking the committee to repeal it.
That is a great explanation. Do I have a motion from a committee member?
I move that the committee repeal R277-520 on first reading and recommend the board repeal the rule on second and final reading.
Thank you, Member Booth. The motion is the committee repeal R277-520 on first reading and recommend the board repeal the rule on second and final reading. Any further discussion to that motion? I'm not seeing any. Thank you very much. Would committee members please vote? I see 5 votes in the affirmative. 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm looking for, maybe Matt's gone. No, there's Matt. Cindy, are you voting aye on this?
Sorry, my buttons are, I keep pressing them and they're apparently my fingers are not working well.
Well, or it's like my F key on my piano. It just keeps sticking. And it really is bugging me. So thank you very, very much. I see 5 votes in the affirmative, and the recommendation is to send this to the full board. Thank you. That completes our committee work for today. Thanks so much. It was so helpful. I hope that Dr. Colts and Joy Lynn Lincoln are still on. Your comments and your careful reading of this rule really enriched our committee discussion, and I appreciate that so much. And great appreciation to the committee members who also read so carefully and had great comments to bring to the discussion. So thank you again, and we look forward to revisiting some of these issues, and have a great afternoon. Thanks.
Bye.
See ya.
Thank you, everybody.
We are adjourned. Thanks.